There's a particular scene in Elstones, and obviously I don't expect you to recollect this particular scene, but it's when Will Ohmsford first meets Eritrea, and it turned out that Eritrea's character was elevated in the television show, and Ivana Baquero ties a lot of the level of performance in that show together in terms of she is just an exceptional actress and took that character in a lot of places. But in the book, the amount of time in the text that's allocated to Eritrea is not massive, but the impact on the story is massive.
Yeah.
And you elevated their, in my opinion, their interaction into a really special moment in the book. Do you know when you're in the booth that you've done something special? You've taken the text and you've lifted it off the page, so to speak? Or is that too esoteric a question?
No, it's not esoteric, but it's very kind because, look, I don't write them, I read them. I am a writer,
yes.
And yet I don't want to take too much credit. But the fact of the matter is, every now and again, I think, yeah, that was right. And sometimes I'm imitating others. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. When I did Jurassic Park, there's the character Hammond. Hammond is the name of the character who came up with the technology of cloning dinosaurs and inventing Jurassic Park. And in the film, he's presented as this kindly, gentle grandfather.
Yeah.
You're right, exactly. And he's, Attenborough, this lovely, buttery English accent.
Yes.
And yet, in the book, he is anything but. He is not kind. He is rapacious. He is a predator himself. And I think that's why Crichton did what he did, because in many ways, Hammond mirrors the dinosaurs that he has resurrected. And he doesn't like his grandkids. And I remember at the time when I was recording it, and he was a Texas oil baron, a petroleum giant. That's how he made the money to create Jurassic Park in the book. And all I could think about was the character from Chinatown, the bad guy in Chinatown. And I remember the Jack Nicholson's character was Jake Giddies. And yet he insistently refers to him as Mr. Gids. He's being intentionally disrespectful. And just the way he would say that, Mr. Gids, it sounded intentional, the way that he would pronounce that name. And I did that. He had a very intentional way of speaking. And I used that as that character in Jurassic Park. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get called out. I'm going to get called out. John Huston. I can't believe it took me that long. I have visited, I swear to God, I have laid flowers at his grave. He's in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, not far from where I live. It's embarrassing that it took me that long to come up with the name John Huston. But I based the character of Hammond off of John Huston because it seemed right. It seemed mean and very intentional. And so, basically it's an instinct thing. And sometimes just casting something in your head will give you the sound that you need. You're not doing an impression. I'll never sound like John Huston, but there is a rhythm, a cadence to a performance. It'd be like if you're in your head, if you've got Joe Pesci, it would be like, okay. That kind of thing, that kind of frenetic, almost staccato burst kind of thing. Years ago, I'm doing the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and there is a race in that series that they speak telepathically rather than out loud. But when they have to speak out loud to other races who cannot hear you mentally, they come off as monotone. And I'm like, I can't. These are major characters. I cannot, in an audiobook, do a character in a monotone. Really, if
Yeah.
I'm going to do the whole thing like this, it's going to fatigue the listener's ear. So what I
Yep.
thought was, it's they come off as sounding like they have no emotion, even though they are the Haruchai. They are creatures of intense emotion, but they can't demonstrate it vocally. I'm like, oh, well,
Yeah.
don't they sound like? In my mind, I'm like, that's what a Vulcan would sound like from Star Trek.
Mm.
And I will never be able to sound like Leonard Nimoy. And yet, my vocal quality doesn't match his. And yet, my cadence, you are my superior officer. You are also my friend. I have been and always shall be yours. I can do that all day, every day. And
Yeah. Well,
it, it, it would suit the character, which is what I did. And only once, in only one review I've ever read, somebody said, wow, he sounds pretty Vulcan there. You want to do something that leads you in the right direction. The guy from Silence of the Lambs, the John Huston in Jurassic Park, or Leonard Nimoy in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. You take a hint, you imitate the rhythm, the cadence, and you try not to get caught. Do enough, but don't get caught.
well, thank you. That's just brilliant. And I did mention, Scott, that we are going to finish up with just a couple of community questions. So, just to my listeners, now, if you do want to ever ask questions, just keep an eye on my socials because I'll give tidbits away as to who I'm speaking to, just in case it doesn't happen on time. But these are a few that did come in. So this is actually from a friend of mine, Chris Argos, who is in Los Angeles. He's an actor and an acting coach and also a voiceover artist. He wants to know, has Scott had to add or change any of his routines or treatments or the tools that he used? Chris mentioned a nebulizer. As Scott's gotten older, has he had to change his routine to maintain the health of his voice?
Wow. I'm grateful for your friend. Please thank him for me. Yeah, I do a lot of maintenance on my voice. And I learned that early on. I when we are recording this, and I'm looking at the calendar here, today it is June 5th. On June 10th of this year, 2024, it will be my 25th anniversary in the industry. I recorded my very first audiobook on June 10th, 1999. And if you listen to what I recorded that day versus what I recorded today, it sounds very different. Voices change.
Yeah.
Typically, they get deeper. Patrick Stewart doesn't sound the same today in Picard as he did in Next Generation. Dude's getting close to 90 years old, His voice is more reedy than deep and supported. It happens. And so I realized that early on, and I started trying to pay attention. To answer your question, your friend's question, I drink so much damn water. It's crazy. The only thing that will, I've become kind of the unofficial hydration guru of the audiobook industry.
Okay.
A friend of mine, literally my friend Johnny, he was like, somebody asked him one time, hey, is there anything I can do for vocal health other than drink as much water as Scott Brick wants me to drink? It's not comfortable. As my father always said, God rest his soul, he always said, boy, you added a lot of vitamin P to your diet. But the fact of the matter is, I used to deal with horrible sore throats because of acid reflux, something I'd been dealing with for a while. I would wake up with a sore throat and it would get worse throughout the day. Well, I was in 2012, I had a thankfully non-aggressive type of cancer. It was thyroid cancer. And one thing that my doctor thankfully advised was drink a shit ton of water, because water flushes toxins out of the body. It is the body's one natural way of getting rid of whatever is wrong with you. And so I got to the point where, okay, I've got a liter here in my hands. I would have 12 of these every day. 12 of them.
Wow.
And I noticed that when I started doing that for my medical condition, my sore throats gone, went away, like turning off a light switch. So I've taken that into consideration. People will come to me. I'll be in a studio out at Penguin Random House, and I've had people come to me and they'll say, "Hey, Scott," and at this point it's like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I'm getting ready to leave. I'm in the lunchroom, and I'm just like dropping off my stuff, in recycling or grabbing water from the fridge on my way out. And they're like, "Hey, Scott, I'm going to be here for another couple of hours. We have to finish the book tonight. And my voice is really ragged. What can I do to rehydrate?" And I say, "Oh, start the day over and drink 2 more liters of water before you began." Because it takes 4 hours to rehydrate.
Yeah.
4 hours. I'm like, "You're already ragged? It's diminishing returns from this point on, pal. Sorry, hate to tell you that. It is what it is." So I pay a lot of attention to my voice and what I can and cannot do. There are corrections that we have to do. I just finished a book, novella that H.P. Lovecraft did. It's called In the Mountains of Madness. And it was for audible.com. And they're doing the Essential Lovecraft. It is a 1,300-page compendium of all of Lovecraft's greatest works. And they gave me his most famous, which I'm really grateful for. So I'm recording this seminal work in horror literature. And they just literally, as I was coming upstairs here to do this interview, they said, "Hey, we have 24 fixes that you need to do." It happens every time. You mispronounced this word. You said these words out of order, whatever. You said killing spree instead of shopping spree, whatever it is. And I will not do those first thing in the morning, because first thing in the morning, my voice is really ragged. It hasn't warmed up yet. I will only do pickups at the end of the day. End of the day. And people will be like, publishers will say to me, they're like, "We need it right now." And I'm like, it will not match. If I sound the way I sound right now, and you try to plug into a recording that I made at the end of the day a month ago, it's going to be end of the day sound, beginning of the day sound, end of the day sound. It will not match.
Yes.
So I'm conscious of those kinds of things. I make those kinds of adjustments. Again, very long.
I know as a rabid audiobook listener myself, nothing pulls me down from the level of performance down to, oh, this is just a recording, more than a really poor pickup.
Yeah.
It's just like, surely that could have been matched a little bit better.
Yeah.
It can take you out of the story. You're like, oh, this is just a recording of a thing, not a performance in and of itself, if you're not paying attention to that stuff.
The really good publishers and producers, what they will do is, if you make a mistake, they will send you a vocal reference, which is the way you recorded it originally. And anything can affect that. What you're trying to do is, best case scenario, you listen to the vocal reference, then you go to the mic and you try to emulate the speed at which you recorded the original, the intensity, the emotional intensity with which you recorded the original, the volume that you had on the original. And if you mess up any of those, it can really alter things. It will really take the listener out of the experience. And for me, there's also the fact that sometimes it was a different microphone, or you're in a different studio. I recorded a book years ago. It was a Philip K. Dick book. And I was down in San Diego, which is about 3 hours from here. And I won't mention which one it was. It was a Philip K. Dick book. I've done a number of them over the years. And I recorded that book on my way back from the San Diego Comic-Con to Los Angeles, I stopped off. I recorded this book for a couple of days, and then I went back to LA. And they said, "Yeah, we have pickups. We need you to go back to the studio and pick them up." And I was like, and I hadn't thought about this ahead of time. I don't know what I was thinking, but I really should have thought about it ahead of time. And I said, "You want me to drive 2.5 hours one way, 5 hours round trip to do 5 lines of dialogue? Really?" Yeah, my answer is no, because I lose a day of work. I'm an independent contractor, and I was like, I can't do that. But what I can do is go to my own studio downstairs and do those 5 lines of dialogue and send them to you, and trust that your post-production team will be able to process the sound to make my studio sound like your studio. And I know this is very esoteric, and most people who don't work in audio.
The people who love this show, who do listen, are obsessed with audio. That's the whole point of this show. I think audio and the voice is underrated and not spoken about enough. So let's go there.
It isn't. And frankly, I get the credit because my name is on the book. But the fact of the matter is, the editors, the post-production team, the directors deserve so much credit that they don't get. And sometimes not all of their names are done in the credits. And that's the first word I was going to say was unfortunate. It's wrong. It's wrong.
Yeah.
They are the unsung heroes. And every single time I do pickups, I do corrections and send them in, I always say, thank you for doing the heavy lifting. Because it's true. That's just the way it is. Anyway, I honestly felt really bad because the guy who asked me to do those 5 pickups, and I was like, you want me to drive 5 hours for 5 minutes work? You must be high. And I felt so bad, and I apologized to him later, and he goes, no, you're right. It's not exactly free close. But yeah, I feel bad because the listener deserves it. And years ago, I was doing a book by Nelson DeMille. It was my very first bestseller. It was a book called The Lion's Game, and it was for Time Warner Audio, which was since became part of Hachette. So now it's Hachette Audio. The Lion's Game by Nelson DeMille, probably the best reviewed book I've ever done, the most listened to book I've ever done. It was very early on in my career, my first bestseller. And we recorded this in 2000. So that's 24 years ago. Most studios did not have internet at that point. And we came across 3 times in the book, a name appeared, a very small airport on Long Island in New York, Islip, ISLIP, ISLIP. We didn't know it was Islip. I had never been on Long Island at that point. And the producer and I were like, well, the publisher didn't give us anything. We didn't hire a researcher. There wasn't any need, because really this is the only thing that we needed to look up. And I asked the director, and he and I were like, would it be Islip? And that's what we did 3 times. Islip Airport. It's not Islip. It is Islip. And it wound up, of course, at the dawn of audiobook popularity. And within a year or two, Audible was breaking wide. And all of the Audible reviews said, I love the book, but Islip, really? Come on. You're better than that.
Yeah.
2 years go by, and the author writes a sequel. It went from The Lion's Game. Finally, 10 years later, he writes The Lion. It was a direct sequel to the book. And I was working in my home studio to record that one. And I got in touch with Hachette Audio, and John Clem, I remember, was working there at the time. And I reached out to John and I said, hey, John, by any chance, are you going to be re-releasing Lion's Game? Are you going to be doing a kind of package deal to have the Lion's Game and the Lion like it's part of the same selling package? And he goes, why? As a matter of fact, we are. And I said, okay, here's the thing. I said Islip instead of Islip. And I was really nervous about telling him this. I said, because I'm essentially admitting that I screwed this up. And I said, is there any way to go back and fix that? And he writes me back this wonderful email. I still have it, still in my inbox. And he says, are you telling me that you were willing to do a 10-year-old pickup? I replied, I am eager to do a 10-year-old pickup. And he looked it up. He got the recording. He did the research. He found out which pages, it's a PDF search, but he got me the vocal references to the way I sounded 10 years before. I sounded really different, not just because it was a different studio, not just because it was a different microphone, but because my voice had evolved over the years. I was much higher pitched. I was a bit more sing-songy in my delivery. He sent them to me, and I fixed them, and I've never felt so relieved in my life. No more of that criticism. Islip, really? I don't have to hear that ever again. And he wrote me back, and he said, we had our post team work overtime on this to try to match your vocal quality today to your vocal quality 10 years ago, your microphone today to the microphone 10 years ago, your space today, the ambient sound to that 10 years ago. When it's done well, I mean, I tell you, technicians are wizards. And yeah, I was so grateful to have that off my conscience. After
I can see it in your face.
Oh God, seriously. Oh my God. And every time I have come to the name Islip ever since then, I start laughing. Every time Islip has come up, and I had it happen in a recent book by the same author, Nelson DeMille. It came up in a recent book by Nelson DeMille. It said Islip, and I'm like, Islip Airport, ha ha ha. It just came out. I'm like, I'm not going to mess it up this time.